Hi, all. I'm Andrea Motsky, and I work as the Lower Willamette Basin Coordinator. I work with a lot of the Portland Metro DMAs all the way up to Wilsonville, and then I also work with DMAs along the Multnomah Channel. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone being here. I'm Priscilla Wolverton, and I'm a Basin Coordinator in the upper part of the basin. So I work out of the Eugene office, and I do have a number of DMAs that are permitted MS4s, but the majority of folks I work with happen to be smaller DMAs that do not implement MS4 permits.
Thanks, Andrea. Priscilla. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Zach Loboy. Zach is the Western Region's Watershed Manager. He's going to start us off with some opening remarks.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Great to be here today. Like Sarah was saying, my name is Zach Loboy. I manage the watersheds and stormwater group in DEQ's Western Region. It means I manage Priscilla. I have a counterpart up in Northwest Region, Steve Mrazek. I don't believe he's with us this morning, but we both really appreciate your participation in the workshop that is specifically geared towards cities and special districts that have MS4 permits. So welcome this morning. This is, I believe, the third meeting that Andrea and Priscilla have organized for some different folks. We're going to be presenting two more workshops that are geared towards specific TMDL implementation requirements for counties and our water conveyance entities that we have as DMAs in the Mercury TMDL. So this is the Willamette. It's the most populous basin in the state, and there's numerous agencies and jurisdictions in the Willamette. So there's actually 172 that we've made DMAs who will be working towards reducing mercury in our state's waterways so that people can safely consume fish and shellfish. So although we acknowledge that some of the DMAs, some of them that are on this call and some of them that have participated in other meetings, have a potentially greater or lesser extent or impact on mercury reduction, we just want to acknowledge that it's really going to take everybody. It's going to take a group effort to achieve the mercury reduction goals. We also know that it's going to take a lot of years to reduce mercury. So it's really these kind of collective incremental efforts for reducing runoff and erosion containing mercury that's going to make the difference, but over a long period of time. There's 38 cities and special districts that are phase 1 and phase 2 permittees in the Willamette Basin. So that's a good portion of those 172 overall. And actions implemented by that group, most significantly through permit requirements, will be a good important component of reducing mercury and sediment from urban runoff. So participants on the call today represent several decades of experience implementing stormwater control measures in many of the largest cities in the Willamette Basin. We are continually impressed by the efforts and results of a lot of the work that has been done over the years, and have a lot of confidence that this good work is going to continue. I would also like to encourage everyone to collaborate with cities who do not yet have a municipal stormwater permit, but will be implementing stormwater control measures to comply with the Mercury TMDL. Really a lot of the phase 1s and phase 2s on this call have a lot of experience that they can share with some of the other communities. So besides Priscilla and Andrea, we have multiple basin coordinators that work in the Willamette Basin. And they're going to be working closely with all of you to answer questions you might have as a designated management agency. They have lots of guidance documents that they can show you and provide to you, make available to you on our website that can point you in the right direction for developing TMDL implementation plans and how to annually report on implementation progress. But all DMAs have been assigned a specific basin coordinator, and towards the end of the session today, we'll show you who those basin coordinators are, or at least provide you with their contact information. But you did receive a letter. And the letter you received from us back in March includes the name of that basin coordinator assigned to your jurisdiction. And even though basin coordinators will be trying to reach out to you, each basin coordinator is the point of contact for a lot of DMAs. So it's important that if you haven't been contacted yet, that you take a proactive approach to reach out to your basin coordinator and really make sure those lines of communication are open, because like I said, we've got multiple basin coordinators, but also 172 jurisdictions that have been identified in the Willamette. So please feel free to pick up the phone and call that basin coordinator. So the TMDL program is a regulatory program. So DEQ does have enforcement capabilities related to approving TMDL implementation plans and the updates every 5 years, and also with receiving timely annual reports and assessing progress in meeting those milestones in those plans. So in turn, the basin coordinators will ensure that DMAs are aware of the reporting requirements and expectations for successful TMDL implementation plan development. Again, that's really speaks to that good communication back and forth between basin coordinators and all the DMAs, so you're not caught off guard with what expectations are, and that we can hopefully help to inform you and keep everyone in compliance. So we had planned on doing a deeper dive on covering MS4 permitting requirements related to the Mercury TMDL today, but unfortunately we have some MS4 staff that were unable to attend this morning. Therefore, we're going to turn it over to Priscilla and Andrea, and they're going to lead you through the rest of the workshop, which will give you an overview of the non-point source requirements related to DMAs that are MS4s, rather than specific MS4 permitting requirements. So with that, I don't think I've got anything else I wanted to convey to the group this morning, but thanks again for attending. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andrea and Priscilla. Take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Zach, for those intro remarks. You can hear me, right, Sarah? And I'm sharing my screen.
You're all good.
All righty. So I am going to start it off today. And then as Sarah mentioned at the very beginning, about 2/3 of the way through, we'll pause for a break to answer any questions that you might have. And then Priscilla will finish up the presentation for today. So what I wanted to do first is start off with a poll, kind of get to know your audience. I mean, I think we know who our audience is, but if you would like to answer this poll, so what is your current MS4 status? Currently implementing a permit, or you anticipate implementing one in the near future? So let's take a look here. Give it a few more minutes. Getting there. About 71% of the people have voted. All right. Doesn't look like we're going to go much past 71%. So the majority of people here, which it's the right workshop for you. This is specifically geared towards DMAs with MS4 permits. I don't know if we may have some counties on the phone or on the call today. We are going to have a workshop next week specifically for counties. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and close it. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. Next slide. So our learning objectives today is I'm going to cover EPA's non-point source and the point source TMDL allocations that are applicable to the MS4 permits, and talk about the non-point source water quality management plan requirements. As Zach said, we won't be able to cover the permitting requirements today, but you can always reach out to the MS4 permitting staff around those requirements. We're going to focus on the non-point source requirements today. And then Priscilla will end the presentation with talking about how you update your TMDL implementation plans and reporting requirements. Okay, the Mercury TMDL timeline. Some of you are very familiar with this timeline. It actually started back at the end of 2017, and that is when we began our advisory committee meetings to update the TMDL. So we had a Mercury TMDL back in 2006, but we needed to update it for several reasons. And one of the major reasons was because in 2011, the state adopted a more stringent fish tissue methylmercury criterion. So this criterion, it's one of our only standards. It is our only standard that's actually the criterions measured in fish tissue. That was updated in 2011, and so we needed to update the TMDL to meet that more stringent target. We ended those advisory committee meetings in June of 2019, and then DEQ, we'd been working with EPA on this TMDL, so we issued our TMDL in November 2019. EPA did disapprove that TMDL at the end of the month, and that was because they didn't believe that allocations that DEQ had developed in their TMDL to apply across the entire basin would be protective and meet mercury standards at each of the 12 subbasins. So for that reason, EPA disapproved the TMDL. When they disapprove TMDLs, they need to develop another TMDL. They did develop that TMDL the next month. In December, it went out for public comment. We did have, it took a little bit, some delays. Part of it was an administration change, but EPA did then finalize that TMDL in February. So that is the effective TMDL for the allocations. For those of you that were at the very first workshop we gave on to DMAs, we had this same slide in this, and I just think it's a good one to start with, kind of as a framework to begin looking at the Mercury TMDL. Most of the mercury that's coming into Oregon is coming from air deposition, and air deposition from outside the state. It can be national sources and even global sources. You know, there's a lot of different sources of mercury from around the world. They can come from, you know, incinerators, coal fire power plants, cement plants, even natural sources, like say from wildfires or volcanic eruptions. We do have some sources from within Oregon. We did have some historical gold mining in the Bohemia mine area near in the Coast Fork area, where they used mercury for some of the extraction processes for gold. So there are some sources within Oregon, but the majority are coming from outside of state through air deposition. So our primary strategy for implementing mercury reductions is by reducing erosion and runoff to water bodies. So since mercury is falling to the ground, in some cases it falls directly into water bodies, but the majority is coming onto the land. It gets attached to sediment, and then that makes its way to streams through erosion, and then it can also be dissolved in runoff that gets to water bodies as well. So this is our primary strategy for reducing mercury for this TMDL. And we have very large reductions to make across the basin. These percent reductions are from EPA's TMDL, and it is by subbasin. And those subbasin reductions range from 88 to 96% reduction. So very large reductions are needed across the state. It is important to the state, though, that we have in the past implemented actions to reduce mercury where we can. So these are some examples that the state has done to reduce mercury. For example, PGE, they had a coal-fired plant outside of Boardman, and I believe that just closed last year. And so that was one of the largest emitters of mercury within the state. And in 2019, the state of Oregon joined 20 other states in a lawsuit against EPA's decision to ease restrictions on coal-fired power plants, which can be a source of mercury and other contaminants. And also to note here, EPA is a designated management agency in the Mercury TMDL. And that is because they have roles in some of the Superfund sites in the Willamette Basin around mining. And also they're in a better position to look at national and even global efforts to reduce mercury emissions. We have also had various state bans and restrictions and how to manage different products containing mercury. And in 2007, the legislature required dental offices to install dental amalgam separators. And as many of you know, our dental fillings can contain mercury, silver, and other metals. So that was a pretty significant way of reducing mercury that goes to wastewater treatment plants, because it's very difficult to remove mercury once it's in the waste stream. And then just through hazardous household waste collection days, being able to bring materials that you have around the house containing mercury to be safely disposed of. So there are some statewide efforts to reduce mercury, doing what we can within the state to reduce mercury. And noting EPA's disapproval of DEQ's TMDL. So EPA's TMDL, that TMDL contains both the waste load allocations and the load allocations, and it's by 12-digit HUCs, okay, or by the 12 different HUCs that is across the Willamette Basin. So you do need to go to EPA's TMDL to find what those allocations are. There is a link to EPA's TMDL on DEQ's Mercury website. EPA also stated, though, that reasonable assurance for implementing their TMDL continues to rely on DEQ's Water Quality Management Plan. So the actions in the Water Quality Management Plan, which is posted with our TMDL on our website, they continue to be effective, and that's what we're going to cover today. So in summary, the effective allocations are EPA's TMDL, gotta look there, but then the effective management measures are contained in DEQ's Water Quality Management Plan. So EPA allocations for the MS4 permittees are actually several. So the waste load allocations that apply to your permit, to your MS4 permit, is 75%, and that's by subbasin. There are a couple of exceptions. The lower Willamette and the middle Willamette subbasins waste load allocation for the permitted waste load allocation is 97%, so higher. The load allocations that apply are related to the unpermitted urban stormwater, and we'll talk about the differences between the permitting requirements, and then you'll have some requirements in the area outside, the unpermitted area. And that's a 75% reduction load allocation. Again, just one exception in the middle Willamette, which is 97% reduction. So large reductions needed. These are aggregated, I just mixed two words together, aggregated allocations, which means that these loads together, so by the subbasin, the permittees together must meet the allocations in each of the subbasins. Okay, so with that, I'd like to turn to the Nonpoint source stormwater requirements. These are the 6 stormwater control measures that are applicable in the unpermitted part of cities, of the city limits of the city's jurisdiction. Okay, this applies outside your permitted area. These are the 6 stormwater control measures that are required for cities that are that do not have MS4 permits. So these are the same requirements that are applying to the MS4 permittees outside the permitted area. And you've all seen these 6 stormwater requirements. They came from EPAs, stormwater regulations for the phase 2 permit holders in 1998. We are relying on these 6 stormwater control measures for several reasons. One reason is that these 6 stormwater control measures were required for some of the unpermitted MS4 cities in the 2006 TMDL. So we wanted to continue using these 6 stormwater control measures in this updated TMDL as well. So each of these 6 stormwater control measures then would be part of your TMDL implementation plan, and they would be reported on every year. So I'm going to go through each one of these. I won't spend a lot of time because many of you are experts in these stormwater control measures, more so than I am. You've been implementing these permits for a long time. So, but I will quickly go over them. So pollution prevention and good housekeeping for city operations. That's about maintaining, city facilities and roadways and pollution prevention. It includes operation and maintenance, employee training, proper application of pesticides, spill response, all of that. And DMAs must maintain records of these activities. And then you would include a description of what you did that year as part of TMDL annual reporting. Public education and outreach. This is about conducting ongoing public stormwater education and outreach. And it's really important to know who the target audience is and what is the best way of communicating with them. That can be done through, newsletters, social media, all different kinds of platforms. An effort that I'm thinking about right now that Aqua has been working with is the Clean Rivers Coalition. That's like a really great example of what some of the Aqua members are doing as an outreach campaign to motivate behavior change and connect people to the river. So that's just like a really great example of what some of the cities are doing currently with their education and outreach program. So as part of that, in the annual report, that DMAs will be assessing progress and towards implementing one of these programs, like a qualitative sort of evaluation for their annual report. Public involvement and participation, and this is providing opportunities for the public to participate in city stormwater development and control measures. So that can be done in a variety of ways, through newsletters, again, social media platforms, like how's the best, what's the best way of reaching out to the public to get them involved in providing comments on stormwater control measures and education efforts. And promoting and maintaining a publicly accessible website is very important. Many of you are already doing that. These websites are also a good place to put a TMDL implementation plan as well as annual reports. The illicit discharge detection and elimination. So this control measure is all about implementing and enforcing a program to detect and eliminate illicit discharges. Part of this as well is maintaining a system map. Many of you should already have a digital inventory of your system. These maps would not necessarily need to be in a TMDL implementation plan, but we would want you to point to where these system maps could be found. So whether it's on a website, in your stormwater management program, or other documents, point to where that can be found. And then include a procedure to document all the complaints, different complaints you might get about illicit discharges into storm drains. Construction site runoff control. So the 1200C is still, required out there for construction sites that are 1 or more acres. We have some of these really large construction sites, but a lot of the construction that's going on across the Willamette Basin is really at some of these smaller areas like development sites. And so we want to be sure that we're also capturing any reduction efforts for erosion, just getting erosion control off these smaller construction sites. For the non-point source requirements, that trigger level for this requirement to have an erosion and sediment control plan is for a ½ acre or more. So that's kind of the trigger level is a ½ acre or more, and that applies from initial clearing through final stabilization of the site. You must also maintain a written escalating enforcement and response procedure. And then the last stormwater control measure is post-construction requirements. So this is retaining stormwater on site. So following construction at these sites, reducing the amount of stormwater runoff and infiltrate as much as you can on site. This applies to new development or redevelopment that create or replace a ½ acre. So that is the trigger level, so to speak. And again, the goal is to retain rainfall on site, many times low impact development types of strategies that mimic nature, green infrastructure practices are used. You are all, I think many of you are experts on all of this, so I don't think I need to go into tons of detail on this, but this is what we're talking about here. Any stormwater, though, that can't be infiltrated on site and leaves does need to be treated, and the treatment system should be designed to remove at least 80% of total suspended solids, and that's just because mercury as well as other pollutants as well attach to sediment. So that's the surrogate measure that we're looking for here. Long-term operation and maintenance are required. So once it's in place, you need to always go back and maintain these sites in order for them to work properly. Okay, those are the 6 stormwater control measures. What I wanted to cover on this slide, first of all, yes, this is the city of Portland. And Lauren, no, this isn't a correct representation of your MS4 and non-MS4 areas. So I just want to get that out right now. I needed a map to work with. And so I just used the city of Portland's map to illustrate where the MS4 permit requirements come in versus where the 6 non-point source stormwater control measures apply. So again, this is for illustrative purposes only. So for the permitting area, so in this case, we're just going to say the permitting MS4 permit area is the purple area while the area outside the permit area is the non-permitting area where those 6 stormwater control measures would apply. So under your MS4 permit, you must meet the permit requirements and then include your actions under that permit in your MS4 annual report. And then you would report annually to DEQ MS4 staff, but please CC the Basin Coordinators. We do look at the MS4 annual reports as a way to see how our DMAs are comprehensively implementing TMDL action. So even if it's done under the MS4 permit, as TMDL coordinators, we're interested to see those actions under the permit to meet TMDL requirements overall. For outside the permitting area, so those 6 stormwater control measures that I just described, those would be included in your TMDL implementation plan. Those actions would be reported on to the DEQ Basin Coordinators. And just noting that if there are other jurisdictions within the city limits, so say it's an ODOT roadway or a county roadway, or there might be ODA jurisdiction or something like that within the city limits, those 6 stormwater control measures don't apply to those specific areas. Those DMAs will have their own TMDL requirements. So I just want to be clear where those apply. Okay. Can an MS4 apply stormwater requirements that are under their permit to the non-permitted area to satisfy their Nonpoint source stormwater requirements? They absolutely can. If you find that it's just easier to implement what you do under your permit to the unpermitted area, you can definitely do that, but it is not necessary. If you don't want to do that, that is fine, and you just need to follow what those minimum requirements are under those 6 stormwater requirements that I went through. And in some cases, what if we're already doing that? What if we are already applying some of those permitting MS4 requirements to our unpermitted section? You can, and if you're already doing it, you're doing it. So you just need to articulate that in the TMDL plan. One way of being able to do that is you could put a table together of those 6 stormwater control measures, and you could say, like, under the first control measure, like say public education or something like that. It's likely applying across your entire city jurisdiction, not just to your permitting area. So if that's the case, just say that. Clearly explain how any of your permitting requirements are already covering actions that would be related to your unpermitted area. And it also would be really helpful as part of when you update your TMDL implementation plans to include a map of your permitting, your MS4 permitted area versus your unpermitted area. And for some of you, it might be one and the same. It might be one and the same. So if it is, it's just helpful to have a map. The Basin Coordinators will appreciate that. So this is my last slide before we go to the question section. So the other component of the water quality management plan addresses direct discharges to water bodies. And this requirement really is just to ensure that for the MS4 permittees, that it's not just simply stormwater, reducing stormwater through a conveyance system to water bodies within your city. We also just wanted to be sure that, you know, the MS4 permit holders are all just looking more holistically. So looking at direct discharges to water bodies, which many of you are already doing because most of you are DMAs for the temperature TMDL. And so you already have riparian ordinances, environmental overlays that apply within your city. You're already doing, restoration activities on streams that run through your city, or you're working with watershed councils to work with private landowners on enhancing, protecting riparian areas. So a lot of the actions that you're doing under your temperature TMDL around the riparian area can also provide buffers to reduce the amount of sediment going directly into water bodies. So really what this is just saying is we just wanted to make sure that cities were also looking more comprehensively. My sense is many of you are already doing this through actions. So with that, I would like to pause here and take any questions that we might have.
Thank you, Andrea. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to raise your hand or type your questions in the chat box. Well, nothing so far, Andrea.
Whoa, I got off easy.
Right? You're doing such a good job.
Okay, well, we still have questions at the end. Priscilla beautiful map. I see that, Lauren. It is a beautiful map, isn't it? The beautiful town of Portland. Yeah, we have time at the very end for questions as well. So so we can also address maybe the questions that come up then.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Sarah, is my slide showing TMDL implementation plan updates?
Looking good.
Awesome. So we just have a few more slides we want to share today. Most of you on the phone today already have implementation plans that you're using to guide implementation. And so most of you won't be developing new plans, but you'll be working to update the plan you already have to make sure that you articulate how you're going to be meeting the requirements of the revised Mercury TMDL and what things you'll be doing to implement the 6 stormwater control measures that Andrea just went over. So just a reminder that these updates are due by September 3rd, 2022. And our expectation is that the plans you submit should be approvable. We may have some feedback. It's okay if they're not perfect, but we do not want to receive draft plans in September of 2022. There's plenty of time to get in touch with us and ask questions and work through a rough draft to make sure that you are ready to submit an approvable or almost approvable plan in September. And just a reminder that your implementation plan, needs to include all of the objectives that are identified in the water quality management plan for each of the 6 stormwater management measures. So some of these things may be things you're already doing. They're just not explicitly identified in your current plan. So you just need to be sure that all that information is provided in the plan. And of course, your implementation plan will also have to include dates to meet the implementation deadlines associated with these 6 stormwater measures. Our expectation is that you're able to fully implement all of these things by the end of 2023, which is the end of the current Willamette Basin 5-year cycle. Now, if you are in a position where you need to develop an ordinance or update a stormwater management plan or change design standards, having that in place by the end of 2023 may not be doable. And that's okay. Your basin coordinator can work with you one-on-one to identify an appropriate timeline if you perceive some challenges in fully implementing these new requirements by the end of 2023. Another thing that is more explicitly identified in the Water Quality Management Plan this time compared to 2006 is the need to estimate the costs of implementing your TMDL plan. Some of you are already providing this information and some of you are not. But moving forward, we'd like to see at least a 5-year time frame estimate for what funds are needed, staff time needed, and the sources of support for implementing all of the various elements of your TMDL implementation plan. And, you know, estimates are what we expect. We understand that you may not have an exact dollar amount, and that's okay. We are asking for your best educated estimate. Measurable objectives. This is a term that's come up in all of our workshops so far, and you'll hear more of this moving forward. When we talk about measurable objectives, we're talking about strategies, including a method to track progress and document challenges. So you need to be able to measure against progress. Are you gaining ground on successfully and fully implementing the strategies in your implementation plan? And part of the measurable objective is to have interim timelines, interim goals, so that you know whether or not you're making progress in a timely manner. So we're going to be looking for measurable objectives and these timelines. And if they're not in your plan, we will not approve your implementation plan. And Andrea, you know, already touched on these things, but just a reminder that TMDL implementation plans have to address your entire jurisdiction. So if you have an MS4 permit and you're implementing that in the permit coverage area, then that just needs to be stated in your implementation plan. If you're in compliance with your permit, then you're in compliance with the waste load allocation. But then you also need to be sure to articulate those things you're doing outside of your permit area to meet the non-point source load allocation. The strategies and actions for your TMDL pollutants without waste load allocation, so that's your non-point source load allocation, are going to probably be sussed out in more detail in your implementation plan, because you can always point to your MS4 permit and MS4 annual report for information about the permit area, what you're implementing inside your permit area. But the implementation plan you know, needs to sufficiently detail how you're implementing the non-point source load allocation. And this is something all of you are already familiar with because you're already doing this when you describe your implementation strategies and actions related to the temperature TMDL that you've also been implementing since 2006. So this is, Andrea shared a timeline with you earlier that got us up to present day. Here we are looking forward. In March, you received a notification letter about your status as a DMA in the revised Mercury TMDL. And that letter started an 18-month clock or time frame for you to update and work with your basin coordinator on getting an approvable plan for the Mercury TMDL in place. And all of those plans, again, approvable or almost approvable is our preference, are to be submitted by September 3rd of 2022. So plenty of time to work with your basin coordinator, but time flies. So as Zach mentioned earlier, really encourage you to be proactive about reaching out to your basin coordinator and making sure that you understand what requirements you have and how those need to be represented in your TMDL implementation plan. Annual reports. So most of you on the line today have been submitting these for a long time. So just a few reminders. Now, annual reports are submitted every year. They are annual, and they are going to describe what progress or what challenges you've come across in implementing the strategies and actions in your implementation plan. Annual report dates vary from DMA to DMA. So if you don't know when your annual report date is, contact your basin coordinator. They're going to be able to let you know. We are also asking that you post your annual reports and TMDL implementation plans to your websites. A lot of you already do this. Some of you are not. Moving forward, our expectation is that information is available to the public. If you want to align your MS4 annual report date with your TMDL annual report date, we can accommodate that. Just reach out to your basin coordinator and let them know that's your preference, and we can adjust your TMDL annual report date to coincide with your MS4 annual report date. In year 5 of implementation, you take a 5-year review where you look over the previous 4 years of implementation. So this is a more comprehensive review than what you provide in your annual report. The next 5-year review for the Willamette Basin is in 23 for most DMAs. We do have DMAs in the Molalla Pudding, as well as some in the Upper Willamette, the DMAs that I work with, that report on dates that don't exactly coincide with 2023. But regardless of the exact date your 5-year report is due, we will likely be using a Survey Monkey, an online form to gather information about your implementation efforts that cover the previous 4 years. And, you know, looking through the names in the participant list, I know a lot of you joined us in Wilsonville a couple years ago for a presentation about the results of the 5-year review. And we expect to do that again. Once we collect all of the responses in 2023, we anticipate looking through those results and compiling them and sharing those with you, so you know what we know about TMDL implementation in the Willamette Basin. Enforcement, not a fun topic. You know, we prefer to work collaboratively and provide technical assistance whenever possible. But just a reminder that TMDL program is a regulatory program. Implementation plan is a regulatory tool. It does not operate just like a permit, but it does have, we do have enforcement authority. And so be sure to update your plan, implement your plan, and submit annual reports and 5-year reviews on time. If you don't, you'll receive a warning letter that lets you know, hey, you're on notice. You didn't do this thing. You're supposed to do this thing. Usually after a warning letter, DMAs, my experience has been that they respond and send the information that they're expected to send. Occasionally that's not the case, but if you are being proactive about talking to your basin coordinator and you're implementing your plan and you're documenting measurable objectives and using adaptive management, there's no reason we should end up in enforcement. But just a reminder, this is a regulatory program, and at times we do have to use enforcement to gain compliance. Basin coordinator. So Andrea and I are on the line today. Nancy Gramlich has also joined us. Roxy Nayar, Brian Kretzberg are also basin coordinators that work in the Willamette Basin, and we slice and dice by sub-basin. So if you're not sure who your basin coordinator is, you can just grab any one of these names and we'll help get you to the right place. But again, please don't hesitate to reach out to your basin coordinator. We're here to help you stay in compliance with the TMDL. And we do have a couple more workshops coming up. Next week, June 1st, we have a workshop specific to counties. If you've looked at the water quality management plan, you already know that the stormwater measures that are required of counties look a little bit different than those required of our city designated management agencies. So if you represent a county, it's a good idea to join next week. So you know what those county specific requirements are going to look like. And then on June 8th, we do have a presentation for our water conveyance entities, irrigation districts, and drainage districts. They are unique from DMAs in many ways, but they also operate systems that receive water from DMAs. So it may be of interest to you to join us on the 8th as well, especially if you happen to send water to or receive water from an irrigation or drainage district. And with that, we have time for some additional questions, if you have some.
Thanks, Priscilla. Yeah, we have 2 questions right now. First one, regarding the construction runoff control measure. Hold on, my screen just changed. Regarding the construction runoff control measure in non-MS4 permitted areas, are DMAs just to require erosion control for construction sites between 1/2 acre to 1 acre, where DEQ's 1200C permitting authority would kick in?
Yes, that's correct. So if it's 1/2 acre is the trigger point, but once you reach an acre, then you would still need a DEQ permit. So that hasn't changed. The requirements for a 1200C permit have not changed. The difference is that you're requiring an erosion and control plan for 1/2 acre or greater.
All right, another question. Does DEQ's order to comply with the TMDL Water Quality Management Plan convey some sort of authority to DMAs to implement actions that they currently don't have the authority to do, like control illicit discharges to non-MS4 outfalls, or control pollution discharged directly to waterways? DEQ isn't delegating their authority, so DMAs need some basis for their regulations.
I might ask a little bit of a clarification on that. That was a good question. Is it questioning the authority of the DMA to regulate, like, say, illicit discharges from private outfalls? Was that?
Let me see here. Ronald, you're the one that asked the question. You would unmute yourself and add any clarifying information.
Yeah, I was trying to hide behind the anonymity. It's sort of a question about, you know, for our MS4 permit that's issued to us actually gives us some sort of basis to require the things that we require. West is a special district, so we're kind of quasi-city, quasi-county, but would be the same for a city. There isn't necessarily an authority to do some of the things that are laid out in the water quality management plan, say in statute, you know, the laws or the rules that apply to cities, counties, and special districts. So is there some sort of, I guess, as there is with the MS4 permit, does the order by the state to comply with the TMDL give people the backstop to impose regulations that they currently don't impose? And yeah, mainly from those non-regulated geographies or non-MS4 geographies within their jurisdiction. I wish it was as simple as the map of Portland that Lauren likes so much, where, you know, and it's probably not that simple, but it's usually more of a checkerboard of jurisdiction. It's not this big blob and this big blob. So it gets really pretty complicated about what applies where.
Yeah, because and I think what you might be saying, Ron, so if you have ordinances in place to enforce your MS4 permit, does the TMDL give you additional authority to do that outside the MS4 area?
Right.
I'm not sure if it necessarily does. Like you might, and I'm going to have like Priscilla or Zach or someone weigh in too, but it may be the case that you might have to develop an ordinance to be able to implement outside your permitting area. I think that's a really good question, because I don't know exactly how your ordinance might be set up to implement your MS4 permit. So in order to implement your MS4 permit, is it specific to that, or could it also apply outside the permit? And if it doesn't, you might have to develop an ordinance in order to ensure that it includes those other areas. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean,
Does
we'll certainly, and I assume others will, we'll certainly have to update our ordinance to be more specific about what applies where, because our current rules for our district are really specific to the MS4, the
Yeah.
public storm system, because that's the backdrop.
Yep.
But there may be a case for a DMA where, you know, we can't just do whatever we want, unfortunately. You know, we have to have some basis that provides the authority to us. And so there may be a case where someone goes to try and either create the ordinance with that authority, and they hear from their own legal counsel, like, wait, we're not even sure we can do that. And so for those folks, I'm assuming they would approach DEQ and say, you know, this isn't something that we think we have the authority to do, and the conversation would go from there.
That makes
Zach, did you have a
sense.
comment?
So I might chime in real quick here, Andrea. So with regards to the order, you know, it's an order that is conveyed from our Environmental Quality Commission, and it would have the same effective authority as a permit. Actually, when we want to issue a permit that we really want to have it be more firm, we will have the EQC actually issue the permit by order, which effectively makes it like a rule. If that helps.
Yeah, I think that's the case too, Zach. It's just, I think it would be kind of important for people to understand that, and that would be helpful, that, you know, if required by the state order to do something, that there's some sort of automatic authority granted, but that may not always be the case. But I think that helps. Yeah.
Well, Ron, since you're still on the line here, do you want to ask your third question?
Oh, I have to find out what I asked.
It's about reporting.
Yeah, so for DMAs that choose to just basically implement their MS4 stormwater management plan jurisdiction-wide, again, going back to that sort of checkerboard of geography of where one applies and the other, or one applies and one doesn't. When it comes to, that's on the front end of saying my implementation plan, just sort of referencing what you do in your swamp. When it comes to reporting, it could get really complicated to try and track and report on those activities separately, the point source and non-point source activities. So is it fair to assume, or safe to assume, that if someone references their swamp for the whole jurisdiction, that when it comes to annual reporting, they get to just report jurisdiction-wide as well, and not try and unpack the geographies?
I see. So like just both the reporting actions under your MS4 permit and your TMDL implementation plan would actually be conveyed in your MS4 annual permit? Is that what you're saying? It just gets wrapped up together?
Yeah, I mean, if we have a measure in our swamp that is obviously, you know, issue erosion control permits, right? Do construction runoff, or even post-construction approved plans for private stormwater systems, we typically will track how many did we do, what percentage of projects, you know, when it comes to the tracking measures. But we wouldn't necessarily say, well, you know, that was on a site that was on a non-point source TMDL site, and that was on an MS4 site. So it would be a lot easier to just report everything together than track which goes into which bin.
Right. Well, you know, and maybe Priscilla can weigh in. The only thing that I would say with that is that the basin coordinators can really, like, we're reviewing what's contained in your TMDL implementation plan action. So that's kind of where our hat is, so to speak. So if we're going to the MS4 annual report to look for those non-point source measures in the unpermitted area, we'll want to know kind of where those are, because then we can actually make comments on that. So I think, you know, I do get your point that it might get a little convoluted. I completely get that, but we also kind of have to be able to split a little bit of where our review needs to be. And so any way you can make that clearer would be helpful.
Thank you. Let's see here. Lauren raised his hand next. So Lauren, you want to go?
Yeah, thank you. I actually, the question that Ron asked about authorities is a really, really great question. I think maybe warrants some follow-up, and in a lot of ways, I think it's also just a legal question. We're kind of in a similar boat where a lot of our ordinances apply just to the assets that we own. You know, the MS4 conveyance system. So we still run the programs in other areas, but like in the case of spills or releases or something, if it's a private outfall site or something, we would refer that to DEQ. That's still implementing a program. It's just we don't have the authority to enforce. So I guess I just wanted to second that question and say that it's definitely worthy of follow-up. My question is about timing of the plans. So the TMDL implementation plan is due September 22, which is going to precede the likely due date of our MS4 stormwater management plans that will be required per our new permits for particularly the phase 1 MS4s. So, you know, we're going to be working on those, what we call swamp documents and sort of stormwater master plans up until that time, right? Which is after the due date of this one. So I guess I'm just wondering what your team's desires or expectations are going to be if, you know, I don't think that the two plans, at least for Portland, will be like super out of alignment or super divergent, but in a certain way, it might make the TMDL implementation plan a little stale once we, you know, develop and submit our new swamp. So are you guys going to want it? So how are you thinking through that issue?
Right. No, that's a good question. You know, I think the actions under your MS4 permit will follow what the MS4 program is requiring. So that's kind of going down its own pathway. So the pathway that we're focusing on with the MS4 permit holders is your TMDL implementation plan with the non-point source strategies in them. If your swamp, since we do look to the MS4 permit to be implementing the permitting side of the TMDL, it's always important that the TMDL aligns with the MS4 permit. But I think generally, unless, you know, I think as part of, unless they're so different, your swamp for the Mercury TMDL is so different that you will want to you'll want to update your TMDL implementation plan ahead of the 5-year time that you could. You know, normally we wait, you know, every 5 years or so to update your TMDL implementation plan. And at that point in time, you could point to any new BMPs or strategies or your swamp in your MS4 permit at that time. So that would likely just suffice, unless for some reason they're that different that you would want to update your TMDL implementation plan to incorporate any new requirements in the MS4 permit. You could always do that. You could always do that. But if they're not that, you know, significantly different, then you can just wait to the TMDL 5-year review time, update your TMDL implementation plan, and then point to any of your new MS4 permit strategies, because that will go in your implementation plan at the high level. We'll look to your permit for all the details on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think maybe, you know, like you are suggesting sort of a degree of difference. I don't think they would be super different. It might just be that by the time we develop and submit our new swamps, there might be, say, additional stormwater program strategies that get added, particularly under one of the 6 or 7 or 8 minimum measure sort of major BMP areas. So, but yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like you guys are, if they're pretty different, then you're open to receiving an updated TMDL implementation plan. If they're not that different, just wait for the 5 years and then do it when it's time.
Because that's already, when you think about it, it's due in 22, right? The implementation plan. 2023 is when we'd be doing the year 5 update. So that's the whole review. You'd be looking at updating your TMDL implementation plan. Maybe that would be end up being good timing anyway for that.
Right.
But you know, if you have any questions, just talk with your basin coordinator about any of those specifics. You can talk with me, Lauren, you know, later on if we have questions about that. But otherwise, you know, just reach out to your basin coordinator if you have questions about any of that timing, and they can help you out.
Cool, thank you.
All right, we've got another question here. Can you talk about how DEQ sees the relationship between the Mercury TMDL and 1200Z permitted sites, and the degree to which the Z permit requirements address the Mercury TMDL?
Sure. I'm not an expert on the 12Z. I do know that the waste load allocation that was given to the MS4 permittees include the other stormwater permits. So the 12Z, the 12As, and the 1200C permits are all wrapped up into that waste load allocation. And I think the idea is that requirements in the 12Z reduce, you know, sediment, you know, as it is. I think in the permit, there are requirements. Again, I'm not an expert on the 12Z, but I think the understanding was that the requirements in the 12Z would likely reduce, you know, sediment, thus reducing mercury. So I think by implementing the 12Z, you're doing what you can to reduce mercury from those sites. I believe that's the case. I'm not an expert on that.
Thank you. There was a hand raised earlier, City of Kaiser. Did you have a question?
Oh, sorry. No, my question got answered. Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, thanks. See, a reminder to anyone on the phone, you're welcome to email me if we have questions. Anybody else? You're welcome to raise your hand or pop a question here in the chat menu. Let's see here. Is that another question from Ronald?
Yeah, sorry, real quick. Just following up on Teresa's good question about 1200Z sites. So I'm not sure if Eugene's an agent, but for DMAs that are not 12Z agents and we still rely on DEQ to run the industrial stormwater program, more specifically for that, could our implementation plan say for qualifying 1200Z sites, DEQ handles compliance with the water quality management plan for the most part? Or is there an expectation for dual authority there as well?
Let me think about that. I mean, my understanding is that the 12Z permit requirements don't change because of the Mercury TMDL. So I think you would just continue implementing as you have been implementing. So I'm not sure if that answers the question exactly, but I don't believe there's any additional requirements, the 12Z. Those requirements as part of the 12Z is, I think, the implementation for Mercury.
Lauren, is your hand still up or did you have another question?
Yeah, I had another one actually also following up on.
I'm sorry about that.
No, that's okay. With the 1200Z permit, just I think the maybe the issue is that a lot of entities are not agents for DEQ in implementing the Z permit, right? So there's that. And then I know at least in Portland, I assume this is the case in a lot of other areas. Probably more than, we've got somewhere on the order of 250 large industrial sites in Portland with 1200Z permits, and at more than half of them are direct dischargers, which I think tends to be the case because large sites are often on riparian areas, which are often serviced by private outfalls. So to me, the way I interpreted Teresa's question, which maybe you just answered, Andrea, is, you know, how effective really with those dynamics do we think, you know, the 1200Z, if the 1200Z permit really wasn't modified to address mercury from industrial sites, I don't know, maybe there's just a concern there. I don't want to speak for Teresa, but I kind of had this same question. And I can't remember if mercury is listed in any of the sector specific pollutants, you know, where it's more regulated from certain types of facilities. So anyway, that's just a little bit of a nuanced, complicated area.
Right. No, I appreciate that question. I wish I knew more about the 1200Z permit, but I mean, my understanding is that it's reducing runoff from these sites. And that's, you know, that's the implementation strategy for Mercury across the city and across the basin. So those efforts to reduce runoff from these industrial sites, which could contain, you know, contaminants, sediment, what have you. So I believe those existing requirements would is still looking at reduction of sediment, which contain mercury and other contaminants as well from those sites. So I believe, as far as I know, Priscilla, I see that you're on. As far as I know, they did not change any of those requirements in the 12Z because I thought they believed that the existing permit was protective.
That's my understanding, and you know, I wasn't prepared to speak to the 1200Z today, so it's definitely something that we can follow up on offline and get back in touch with you with additional information.
Thanks. I just think it's also just recognizing some of the challenge in not calling the industrial sites out as their own specific source category, you know, in the TMDL, sort of folding it under the envelope of MS4s, which is not often really actually the case. And they do pose kind of a unique source of pollutants. So that is, you know, beyond anybody's ability to change at this point, but there might be nuances in how that gets implemented because of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Therese, did you have a follow-up question?
Oh yeah, I just thought I would pipe in and say that, yes, Lauren articulated, as he often does, very well, one of the aspects of my question. So I was just wondering how, you know, how DEQ was viewing the 12Z permits and whether you're thinking that those are effective in addressing the Mercury TMDL. And then also part of me is thinking, since we're slicing and dicing things, point source, non-point source, direct discharge, not direct discharge, I'm just wanting to make sure that I understand clearly what, say, the City of Eugene's responsibilities are as it relates to the 1200Z sites. And we are, Eugene is an agent for DEQ. And actually one little slight difference for Eugene is that we implement or administer the 1200Z permits out to the urban growth boundary. So actually also in Wayne County jurisdiction. So there's a few different layers there to consider. Thanks very much. I'm sorry to catch you off guard with that question.
No, it's fine. Don't worry about that, Therese.
Okay.
All right, are there any other questions? Looks like we're potentially going to wrap up early, so don't be afraid.
So Therese, did we answer your question? It seemed like you had another part to your question about the city of Eugene being an agent in addressing 12Z requirements.
I think following up with just some more clarity as to the city's responsibilities, and just understanding sort of incremental responsibilities that the city of Eugene has over and above what the DEQ's 1200Z permit related expectations are. That's kind of what I'm homing in on, I guess.
Okay.
Because I'm not an expert on the 1200Z permit program either, but my observation of it, and anyone please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's pretty pollutant specific. I mean, a certain industry has to meet, if benchmarks is the right word, still benchmarks for certain pollutants, and they may or may not meet those. And if they don't, it's still not out of compliance. They need to do additional measures. So it's kind of like, it's got a pretty wide, in my mind, gray bandwidth within which an industry is still in compliance with their permit, but they're not meeting their standards for those specific pollutants, none of which may be mercury, right? And so zooming in on those specific things. And so I'm just wondering how do those permits adequately address the mercury at TMDL?
Okay, yeah, so we can try to get some clarifying language and specifically dig into that. I'm actually not super certain exactly what the TMDL said with regards to the 1200Z permit, but I think what it said, and Andrea alluded to this earlier, I think that the 12Z permit was given basically a waste load allocation that was equal to the requirements in the 1200Z permit as it stands, which basically means that there isn't any additional thing that those registrants would need to do.
That's my understanding, Zach, because, in the water quality management plan, there wasn't any specifics around the 12Z and to say additional things. And I can check in with Krista Ratliff or someone about that. But my understanding, implement the 12Z as implemented, and that is the extent of what you need to do. But right, the 12Z, the 12As, and the 12Cs, that's all part of that 75% reduction for the waste load allocation. Those were all included, whether people agreed with it or not, at the time of the development, but that is what happened. That was part of that waste load allocation.
Mm-hmm. So understanding, if you can share some of that rationale, it would just really help with my understanding for sure. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think we can pull some of that language out of the TMDL and maybe even create some more plain language stuff we could send out.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions or last words from the speakers? All right, well, seeing none, on behalf of the agency, I want to thank everybody for attending this meeting today and asking such thoughtful questions, and appreciate it. We have this recorded and it will be posted to our website, hopefully in a couple of days. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.